share. So at least I shared the files with you. So you should go.
Okay, sure. I'm downloading them.
So let's begin the class. So hello again and good morning. We are going to be moving on to creating kind of like a small project, or using what's left of our time to create a small project. So, and how is your capstone project going? Has it been going well? Do you have any issues, any blocks, any difficulties doing some things? If you have them, should kindly let me know so if I could be of assistance or of help, I could put you through some things to make the project easier so that you guys can have your certifications. So if you have any issues, please, I would like to hear that this morning before we move on to the class. So how is your capstone project going? Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, hello, we can hear you.
Can hear you.
Okay. So has there been any difficulties with your capstone project? How's it going? How's everything all going?
I haven't started working yet, especially the software developer. It's only the product manager designer that are working.
Okay. So when are you guys to start work, or you have to wait on the software
Wait
game?
until they are through, then we'll start our
All right. If adventure there are any issues, you can always reach out to me so that we can look at them together and probably fix them. Okay, and hopefully no one has any questions from yesterday's class. The corrections, were they all clear, or I should probably retouch some parts? And I don't know why there are fewer people in here that I would expect to have. Let me see. This has done that way. Can you probably put a podcast along that the class has started?
Okay.
Okay. So was there anything from yesterday's class that you find confusing? If there were, so that I would be able to like just touch up on them. Because I wouldn't want something that would disrupt whatever you guys have to do on your capstone project. So I'll just be touching lightly on the project. I wanted us to do two before, but after the discussion with Mike, I might probably have to reduce it to one. But we'll see how it goes. So is there any question from yesterday's class, like from the assignments? Is a part you don't understand or anything? So
mine is not with the assignments.
Okay.
It's just when I was doing my personal learning. Excuse me. I realized that when I use document.getElement by class name, it was not appearing. But then when I use either ID or then the query, it works. Yeah, so I was just wondering why it had to be so.
Okay, do you understand that the get elements by class name is get elements with a plural s, like elements?
Okay. Aside that,
I don't think there should be any issues. I think it's always best to choose a query selector when targeting a single class. I don't know. I think probably the get elements by class name has issues, probably deprecation issues. That's why it does not work most of the time. But I think query selector should work out fine for any selection actually.
All right. Okay, I guess that's it. Because so I was trying to display it on my screen,
Okay.
and then I'm like, why is it not displaying? So I changed it to what's the name? I
An
changed it
ID.
to an ID. It worked. And then I changed it to query selector. It also worked. So I was like, yeah, I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's what probably what it is. So anybody with questions regarding our classes so far before we move on, because progressively we probably have to build on some things that we've touched before, and it won't be what's it called? It won't be optimal if I have to like start readdressing some things that I've done before. So if there's any questions about the last class, if you don't understand it, let's treat it now before I move on. Because they're a little bit more complex, not complex per se to understand the basics, but it's just it's a bit more tricky aspect of the things when we move on now. So is there anything from the previous classes that anybody does not understand? If there is, so that I can touch upon them before you move on, please. Particularly the last assignment, if there's any part that felt that you don't understand at all, even if it's everything, then I'll try my best to explain. Okay, I'm assuming there is no question. The attendance is pretty low, and I don't know why that's very fun. This is 9 days right? Okay, I guess there's no question. Let's just progress to today's class. So what we have in today's class is just a simple HTML file, right, with a simple display. It's a web app. So I told you guys I will be creating the UIs yesterday, right? So this is the basic UI that I came up with, more or less. So what that is just a simple web app. Oh, I could scroll more than that. Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me. Close the phone by mistake. So this is kind of like just a basic app with a little bit of styling here and there. So it's a weather app that gets different weathers by different locations, right? So let's say you have a city that you want to check the weather at that point in time. Probably just say let's say Lagos, for example. Don't know if that's going to be on the map actually. Okay, so we have the Lagos map here. It says Lagos NG. You can see that the temperature changes, the weather status also changes, and the temperature range also changes. So let's say, for example, we want to get for, let's say, which other city do we have? Let's see, Accra, for example. That's the closest I can think of. So for Accra, you can see the clouds, the temperature range does not really change, probably because we're in the same West African region, and it changes for the weather type. So you can actually get weather information from this weather app that we built. So what it is generally is just we're using this open weather map API, right? So the open weather map API is kind of like um, an API where you can get different weather data from. So you can get the current weather data, you can get the hourly forecast, you can get bulk downloading, all of these things. So what we'll be using is this current weather data, right? So it is what would house everything that we are going to be needing for building our weather app. So essentially in the HTML file, it's not much, just a couple things. A container that contains a form, right? This form, it just takes two inputs, right? The input and the button with an error type, right? So basic things. Then for this section, we have the image that we're going to be getting, but it's not here yet. Then the location, just set it to a default location of New York. Then this Thursday, then this temperature, the weather is sunny, and the range, we set it to this average, just set it random values actually. So if you check this now, actually, if we reload this, so you can see that it defaults back to this New York, US, right? Thursday, the date to set to 2020, then the, the temperature just defaults to what we have on here, right? So let us make this like 2021 or 2022. So let's make this. Today's was 24th or 27th. Imagine that. That's February. It's a Tuesday. Right, so we just have this default HTML tag that we have. So the style is also here. So you can go through the style, but I don't think I really have to explain the style because it's not an HTML CSS class. But if there's any part when you go through it and you see that there's any part you don't understand, you can call me so I explain what's going on there. Move over it. Now, so what we'll be treating is this JavaScript part I have actually written, right? So it's not a lot, it's actually just simple things, but we get to explore a lot of concepts, right? So among the concepts that we're going to explore is what we call like asynchronous JavaScript, which is just you getting an API, right? You get data from an API and doing things with it while something else is running actually. So we talk on asynchronous programming and also on JavaScript generally for promises. And what promises are is this thing that you're seeing here, which I will explain in a minute. And we'll touch up on APIs generally. So let's begin. Sorry, was anybody saying something? Okay. Now let me show you something. Okay. Let's copy this one. Okay. Now, so essentially the what's it called the API that we're going to use is just a URL, right? APIs generally are URLs, like they are just websites like this, something like this, right? That have different uses. Now, generally we go to a website and say probably let's see, we go to something like this. Yes, all of this is a URL key. What this essentially is also an API. But what the API does is it gets a particular data, right? So that's essentially what an API is. API is also a URL. It's a URL that you want to perform specific actions on. But I think we should have basic ideas of what URL is. It's just web addresses like this, where you have all of this stuff here, right? It's not really like this most of the times. Probably you have them predefined that it's something that you can read like api.openweathermap.org and stuff like that. But what URLs generally are, or what APIs generally are, there's essentially URLs where you can get data from. You know, for you to have any server, right, you have to have a specific URL that you can use to connect it, like that you can use to connect to it. So that's essentially what an API is. An API is that URL that you use to connect to your server to send data to it and receive data from it essentially. So that's what it is. So that's why we have this URL here that has all of this information, and it's getting this information that we are seeing. This is for Lagos, right? You can see that we have a weather, you have an ID for it, the name, the description, the icon, then you have the temperature, the feels like, then the temperature, minimum temperature, maximum temperature, the pressure, the humidity, the sea level, the ground level, all of that, right? So you have visibility, the wind speed, the degrees, the gust, everything. That's all of the data that is coming from Open Weather Maps API, right? So it's an API, as I mentioned, this is essentially just a way for you to connect a server to your front end for data. So let's say you need to send data to a server or you need to receive data to a server. An API is just the bridge between you and that particular server. Hopefully that is clear. So that's what an API is what connects you from the front end to a particular backend, a server. That's an API. So it allows you to communicate with your server, it allows you to send requests to it, and also post requests to it, and also get requests from the server. So let's say I want to get a particular data from a server. I would send a request to the server that, oh, I want to get the data from your server with a certain URL, right, which is the API. Let's say I want to post a certain data to the URL to the server, right? I'll do that with another URL with another API. So APIs are essentially just the bridge between you and your server for you to be able to get specific data and for you to be able to post specific data to your server so you can store data and you can get data from APIs. So now, for example, now we have Lagos here, right? In this URL, this part, I don't know if you can see it. So we have Lagos here. So if I change what is there to probably like my Duguri, for example. So you can see now that it will get data for my degree at that point, right? So we have this my degree, this is the name, the time zone, the ID, the code, the country that it's in, the sunrise. It gets every data from the server that stores all of this data. So essentially, you can add any city to this Open Weather Map API and to generate the weather condition of that particular region for you. So Open Weather Map is just a data source for us to be able to get specific data because we are not allowed to access it or we are not able to access them locally, like getting data from so like copying it from a flash drive and transferring it to a PC and using it. We cannot do that, right? So we want to essentially be able to connect to a network that has all of those data and use it in our own application. That's essentially what API does for us. It allows us to communicate with a server that is like millions of miles away, right? And it allows us to use data on that particular server in our application. So we can send data to that server, we can get data from that server, we can update a particular data on that server, we can also delete from that server. So that's essentially what an API is the bridge between you as the front end guy and the server that you want to get data or send data to. So is that clear for API explanations? Because I think I mentioned it in yesterday's class that you guys should look up what APIs are. And if you did, you will have gotten like detailed explanation of what it is. But if it's not clear how I explained, you can call me back so I can probably try another analogy to explain it. Okay, 9 minutes. Oh, nice, 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 nice. All right. So moving on. So asked Elise to send the code to the group. So you guys should have seen it by now. It's just the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. Ouch. And JavaScript codes, right? So the HTML and CSS part, that's the easy part. The JavaScript code that we're going to be writing now is the hard part. Now, this is something that I'm going to be coming across a lot. Now, is this first three lines here, right? You have const API is equals to key, then it's an object, right? You know what objects are? Objects are essentially just a list of items that you want to like define with specificity, right? So you have a key property and you have a base property, right? Now, so essentially in world of URLs, you have this thing called the base URL. And by default, what a base URL is just the the
Hi, good morning.
yeah, go on.
Please, can you help us enlarge? Like the text are so small.
Oh, I'm
They're
really
very
sorry.
small at my end. Yes.
Sorry. That's just the font size I use. Sorry. Is it okay now? I'm very sorry. That's my it's okay now.
Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so essentially for a URL, there's this thing called the base URL. So what the base URL is, yes, is just oh, this would be a nice time to actually do this. Let me try. My system does not freeze during this fix. Yeah, give me a minute. This relates to the class and it does not in a way, but I just want you to make mention of what APIs are. Okay, so we'll get back to that later. So I was explaining base URL. What a base URL is, because you can see from our code here that what we have here in the base property, right, is just the URL, it's just a particular URL. So essentially, what a base URL is the basic URL that you can get from any website, right? So let's say, for example, google.com, right? So google.com is actually the base URL for Google. Like it's the template URL, it's the template URL. Like for you to go to branch other um to other services that Google offers, you have to first reach out. You have to reach this google.com URL first. Is what you put in first. So a base URL is actually that URL that is general to every endpoint that you go. And by endpoint, what I mean is, let's say you want to go to Gmail now, you can see in this line here, we have Gmail, right? But you can see that it's just google.com/ then Gmail, right? So essentially, that's what a base URL is. A base URL is the basic URL. Like before you're able to branch to other subparts of a particular website, right? The base URL is the URL that you go to, is the original URL. So let's say I want to go to google.com, right? To just give me this page, right? So if I go to google.com/google.com/, Gmail now. So this is me branching to a specific part of Google. So if I go to that now, it will load up my mail for me. Share it. So a base URL is essentially just the basic URL for any website. Now we have different, let's say for Twitter now. Right? So let's say for Twitter now, the base URL is twitter.com, right? The base URL is twitter.com. So the template URL, which by URL, which is just a web address, right, is essentially just the base URL is just the URL that associates with everything before you branch out to different parts of a particular web app. So you can have lots of other things like that come up even after the twitter.com, but the base, what you build off on, the main domain itself is the base URL. So it's just twitter.com. So let's say you have GitHub now, for example. So GitHub. So GitHub would show you your GitHub.com will just go to what GitHub is initially. When you start using the / or drag code, then it takes you to my repo. Then when you want to go to a specific project, you have all of this ///. So all the other slashes that come, those are the secondary part of the URL. But the base URL is essentially the initial URL, like what the main app is. That's what the base URL is. Hopefully we get that. So you'll probably be seeing it a lot in real life things. You just be out our base URL is something, something, something. For you to be able to get a particular data, you just have to do another thing. That's a basic URL, a base URL. A base URL is your template URL. So this, let's say for example now, this is my repo, right? So you have this whole drag code stuff. This is my repo. This is a base URL. Now if I change this from drag code to SMAM now, okay, so this is the URL of my friend, right? So he has all of these things too. So the base URL you can see is the same. Like we are going to different places, but you can see that this URL still maintains the same thing. That's essentially what a base URL is. A base URL is essentially that's what a base URL is, right? It's just the URL that connects you to other parts of your app, right? And the key is essentially just a verification tool, right? For you to be able to access certain APIs, you need to have keys. And what the key is kind of like just the key to your padlock, right? For any APIs, most of the time is restricted to the users. You don't just want anybody to access your API. Let's say you're working for a farm now, or you're working for a company, and they have certain APIs, like they have certain data that are sensitive data, right? You don't want anybody to just be able to access them. So that's why developers they come with this thing called a key. The key is just a tool that allows you to be able to access those data. Generally, it will not be open like this. Like this way that I'm writing key down, you are seeing it. The industry practice will be you never put a key like this in your repo, like you never put it in your file that it will show like this, and this is your key. It is very, very bad practice. But just for the sake of learning and for the sake of simplicity, you have to put that so that we can all understand, right? So a key is essentially just what allows you to be able to access certain things from an API. Without the key, you probably won't be able to access APIs. So a key is essentially that. Okay, Elise.
So, are you saying generally you don't put keys? Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry. I'm saying that does that mean like you don't put keys in your when you're declaring the API stuff?
Okay, what I mean is like you don't put keys in your code this way, right? You don't put
Okay.
keys in your code that it will show in your code like, oh, this is my API key. If it's a public repo, no, a public repo is something that people can see, right? So it's people, something people can contribute to. And if you have sensitive data on there, this API key allows people to access that data, right? And for hackers or people that are like not that they probably want to use your data for something evil, they can access your data from this API key using this API key and they'll get your data. So essentially, you don't put it in your code. For the API, you definitely have to include it in the API when you want to use the API. But just putting it plainly in your code like this is bad practice. It's something you don't want to do. So there's a way you hash it such that it will not show in your code. But that's like pretty advanced stuff. So for the basic things, just like general stuff where you don't have anything sensitive, you do it like this so that you'll be able to use it in your app.
Sorry,
Exactly.
please, can we review this key again? How do you get the key? My network locked me out.
Okay. So a key is not something that you get like you write your own key yourself or something. A key is something that is supplied by the backend people, right? Like the server that are trying to access. They will supply the key for you, like, okay, this is the authorization, like the authorized personnel that we want to be able to access our data. So they just give you this key as sort of like an identification for you to be able to access the data. So you're not the one that generates this key yourself. You're just allowed to be in charge of it. So They're the ones who use it whenever you want to get a specific data. Like this URL now is open to everybody, right? This base URL is open to everybody. I can just go on there and try to get data, right? But this key allows you access to it. If I go to this base URL now, it will not give me any data. Why? Because we're not passing in any key. Because the key is what essentially gives you the power to be able to access the data that you need to get from a particular server. So the key is kind of like your password. It's kind of like the key to your padlock, like to your vaults, right? You have your vaults where you have a lot of data, right? It's probably sensitive or it's something you don't want people to know about. So the key is your password, is your key to your vault, essentially. So that's what the key is. Essentially, the key for you to be able to access is an authorization ID for you to be able to access certain data that is not generally going to be available to the public, right? So that's what the key is. So, and what I was mentioning, if peradventure you didn't hear, was that a key, you won't essentially put it in your code like this. So if anybody looks through your code and sees your key, they can access your data, and that's not, you don't want that to happen. So there's a way you go about hiding it in your code such that it is not going to show when people are viewing your code, right? So, but that is pretty advanced topics. You probably when you start working or you get to know them, you can just take them out. It's something very easy to set up. It's called an ENV file, but it's pretty. We don't need that now. So for learning purposes, let's just say we have our key here. You get. Hopefully, I answered your question.
Please, I want to ask. So, how do you get the key? Are you going to buy it or what?
No,
Because you said it's not just accessible to anybody. So how do you get it?
No, you don't buy the key. What the key is, it depends on the corporation that you're working on. The key is essentially provided to you by the backend people, right? There are two sides to this website or this thing. The people that do the front end, the UI and everything that you see, and the people that work the back end of how everything works. You click on something works, and it actually works. Like it sends something to the server, right? So those are the backend people. So the backend people are going to be the ones to supply you the API key, right? So the API key they supply to you, your own is to just use it. You get, so you're not buying or getting anything. Once you're in a company or once you're in a particular place, or generally an API itself, like it's a public API that is open to use, you'll be able to get your own specific keys. Do you get? And do you get that?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, so essentially, let me walk you through how to get your own key set. Like this weather map, this current weather map, right? For you to be able to get an API key, most of the time you always need to sign up with them. Like you sign up with let's say you're using a public API now, like because this one now is a public API, it's not a company. They just generally give that data out to people, right? So, but you have to sign up with their service for them to be able to register you and give you a specific key. So that's how it works. So if you're using a public API, you sign up with their platform and they will give you a key for you to be able to access their data, right? So if you're working for a company now, your company will give you your API key, the backend guys will give you your API key, so you don't have to like seek for it or sign up with them because you're already in your company. So hopefully that makes sense. So now
Yes.
let's say you have something like this public API now, right? So you want to be able to like get an API key and use their data, right? You just so you sign in with them. If you don't have an account, you sign up. So let's create an account, right? So let's just do. So I'll just put my email, blah blah blah. Give up all of this, and you say I'm not a robot. You create account, right? So this part, I don't think I really need this part. So they will give you this basic thing. They tell you to send a confirmation email to your mail. So you have to go and set that. Where is this one? It's not this one. Okay, probably just go to somewhere else. So so they send the verification mail, you just have to verify. So verify your email. So once that is done, you're set, right? So let's say you want to get Okay. Let's say you want to get a specific API, you just go to their API keys, right? You see, they gave me a key by default. So this key is what you're going to be using in your what's it called? Your API. So you don't have to, you are not the one that are going to pay for the key. Or if you want to use some certain APIs that are not public, you probably have to pay for some API keys. Let's say you want to do more advanced things, there are some APIs that you have to pay for. Like for Twitter API now, I was building a Twitter clone. So for the Twitter API, you have to pay to access some features, right? So for certain parts of an API, they might not make it free. So you probably have to pay to get access to those ones. So in those cases, you might have to pay if you're using a public API that you need more features from. But for just normal basic ones, they give you an API key that you use to get. So hopefully I answered your question. And
Yes, thank you.
all right, cool. So moving on. So that's what this whole first one is about. So we just have essentially an object that has a key, right? The key is just the API key and also a base. A base is just the base URL, right? So these two lines, if you read them, they are simple things. It's just search inputs, right? And we are defining a search, which is just selecting this query, selecting something with the class of search. In this case, is going to be our input type, right? And also we have a btn, which is just selecting our button class here, this one here, right? So that's what we are doing with these two lines, line 6 and 7. So we add an event listener to our button, which I said we could do multiple ways. We can use the on click and just do our function normally, but we use this event listener, right? So we have this click event and a get input function. You know, I told you the event listener, it takes 2 parameters or 3, but we don't really need the third one. So the first one is the event, which is the click that I want to happen. And then on that event, we want to get input. So essentially what the get input is just a function that prevents defaults, right? Okay, so we see this thing, we say e does prevents events does prevent default, and you're probably like, oh, what is this? So essentially, whenever you click a button, right, it has a type of submit, right? Whenever you click on the button and it has a type of submit, it reloads your page. It reloads the whole page, right? So let's say I go here and I remove this event that prevents defaults now, right? So and I come back to my other, come back to this weather app, right? I press submit. Let's see. What it does is it will actually reload your page if you remove this event.prevent. Oh God. Okay. If you remove this event.prevent default, is that it will reload your page and anytime you click on the button, and you don't want that to happen sometimes because you are probably trying to analyze some data from there. So that's what this event.prevent default is. Essentially, how you do it is on the, now we are adding this event now to the button, right? So on that button is where you write a function called events.prevent default. So event is just this event that we're getting from here, which is the click. So it will just be on click, it will prevent default action that it will take. So that event, this parameter that is here is just this click that we have in this line 8 here. So events that prevent default will just prevent the normal occurrence, and the normal occurrence is that your whole page will reload, and you don't want that. So that's what events that prevent default is. Now we are setting up a what's it called, a checkpoint here, right? So we are saying if event.type is equals to click, that means if we have a type of click, if the event type is a click, then we want to get data. And we are passing in search.value. This looks like really something that is very complex. But not really, it is not. It's not complex at all. So what we are doing is we are checking if the event type is a click type, right? And we are getting a data. So the get data is actually a function. So this function right here, which we are going to explain in a minute. So the get data is a function that passes in this search.value parameter, right? This search.value. And what search.value, you can see from here that search, we are getting an input field, right? This input it has a class of search, right? And you know that whenever you do a search dot value for any input field, you get whenever you do a dot value for any input field, you get whatever values on that input, right? So let's just do F12 for example. So let's say I put Lagos in here now and I press submit, right? And generates stuff for Lagos. You can see now from here, from this line here, this line 14, you can see that it console.log what the the value of search dot value is, which is line 14 here. So essentially, what search dot value is just the input value that we put inside of this function and inside of this input field, right? So that's what gets rendered in the search dot value field. So that's why we have Lagos here. Do we understand that? Do you understand that part, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Now, so we're saying if the event type is click, whenever the click happens, right? Whenever the click happens, we want to perform a certain action, and that certain action that we want to perform now is this get data. So what the get data does is it retrieves data for us, and this is where it starts to get tricky. How to retrieve data? Now, there's this thing called a fetch in JavaScript. So let's go back to let me see. Is MDM going to explain it better? Or she used to be through schools. I don't have notes for this. Okay. Okay. Now you can see from the simple explanation that JavaScript that W3 schools makes is the fetch API essentially allows you to make requests to web browsers. What do HTTP requests mean? You know, it's just HTTP requests. Let me show you requests. So essentially, what an HTTP request is just allowing you to perform certain actions on your server. Like an HTTP request is what allows you to call for certain data from your server, or allows you to post certain data to your server, or allows you to update certain data or delete certain data. So that's essentially what an HTTP request means. It just allows you, like, it's just a request to a server. You know, anytime we go to a specific URL, let's say we go to twitter.com, right? What we are doing is we are sending a request to Twitter that, oh, Twitter, we need you to show us something. That's what an HTTP request is. It's essentially allowing you to call certain parts of a server, or is allowing you to like access certain things. An HTTP request is just URLs generally. It essentially deals with URLs, honestly speaking. So an HTTP request, this would be an HTTP request. Why? Because we are trying to access this twitter.com/home, right? We're trying to access that in our browser. This is an HTTP request. So if I want to post something, it's also an HTTP request. I want to be able to send my data to a certain server. It's an HTTP request. I want to be able to get data from a certain server. That's an HTTP request. I want to be able to update a certain data in a server. That's an HTTP request. I want to be able to like delete a certain data, right, from a server. That is also an HTTP request. So HTTP requests are just like calls. They are requests that you make. I like how very, very intuitive JavaScript is. Like all of those terms, they're pretty simple. Once you know, like, oh, what is a request is actually just calling for something from a server. I hope you understand that. So if I want to call something from a server, I want to probably get like my profile from a server. Now let's just say I go to Twitter, right? And on Twitter, I go to profile. That means I want to get my profile from my server, right? I want to get what my profile is from the server. So that's essentially what an HTTP request is. An HTTP request allows you to make certain calls make certain requests of your server. So you want to be able to like make requests, you want to be able to like update things, you want to delete things, you want to create certain data. That's what an HTTP request is. They allow you to do those things. So how you do them in JavaScript is you call with the fetch API. So the fetch API is what you use in JavaScript to make requests. So the MDNJS explanation is it provides an interface, right, for fetching resources. That's pretty basic and pretty simple. So for fetching resources can be a lot of things. It can be in form of data, it can be in form of anything. So that's essentially what a resource is. A fetch request just allows you to call certain parts of certain servers, right? Allows you to probably want to make a post request to it, want to post certain data to it. If a fetch API allows you to do that. If you want to get certain data from it, it allows you to do that. If you want to update or delete certain data, it allows you to do that. Hopefully that API part is clear, like fully clear. So that's essentially what fetch allows you to do. It allows you to post data, so allows you to get data, it allows you to update data, it allows you to delete data. You get. So that's essentially what an API, what the fetch API does. Now there are a couple things that you probably have to learn. So let me do HTTP response codes, right? And these are like they're quite a number, and I will not want to list everything, but the essential ones that you really have to know, let this load up so that you can see. The essential ones that you really have to know is response code 200, right? What 200 means, whenever you receive a response code of 200, it means that, oh, the API call that you made was successful. Like you have a successful API call. And that means like you're getting, probably if you are sending data to something, you're getting you're sending the data, you've sent the data successfully. Let's say you are oh, did I say get? I don't know. So let's say you are sending data to a specific server now. When it returns a response code of 200 for you, that means it has definitely sent that data to the server. If it returns a response code of 200 after you get the data, that means you are definitely getting that data. So the ones that is another one that is important is this 400, right? So this 400, whenever you have a response code of 400, it means that your your request was a bad one. Probably you are not using the API very well, or you are calling the API in the wrong way, because you might actually be calling an API the wrong way. That's why like backenders and backend guys, they try to make documentations of how you can use their API, which is very, very useful, because if they don't make documentation of how you can use their API, you totally be lost. Like you'll be totally lost when you are using the API. So whenever you have a response code of 400, it tells you that, oh, this API call that you are making is very, very bad, like it's a bad request, right? So when you have a status code like 500, these are the three most essential ones. You have 200, 400, and 500. So when you have a response code of 500, what this means that, oh, the server that you're trying to access has a certain issue, has an error. So you won't be able to access that certain server. So you know that error is not from your own side, but from the server side. So whenever a response code of 500 is sent to you, that means, oh, boss, so you have our server has an error, so you won't be able to access our data at this point. Now, so for something like this, it should be okay. Something like this will make mention. Now, I'm making a call to this API, which we won't see essentially, but so we can just see that it returns the data for us, right? We have all of this data here. Now, if I press F12 on this page, right, and I go to networks, right? So a network is essentially where you see all your fetches and everything like that, all your codes that you've written. So when you go to network tab, right, let me expand this a bit. You can see now from here that we have a response code of 200, which means we are sending in the right data and we are getting the right response. You get. So you can see now that it's telling us that our request method is get. And what a request method is, I'm going to explain that. A request method is essentially the method, like the kind of request that you are making. Now, let's say I want to get data from an API. It only makes sense that the request method will be get, right? Because I'm trying to fetch something from that API. So let's say I want to. Did someone want to say something? I guess not. So let's say I want to post a certain data to an API now. The request method will be a post, right? Now let me Google this out for you guys so that you can see what's request methods, the kind of request methods that we have. I think we have like 5. The essential ones, probably 5. Okay. So you have this get method. So what the get method allows you to do is it allows you to retrieve responses from a certain API or a certain server. The get method will just take data from the server. Now, anytime you go to a website and you do something like, oh, you want to go to Twitter.com and see Twitter, right? This is a get request. You are making a get request to Twitter, like, oh, Twitter, I want to see a couple things from your page. Kindly give me that data. You are getting a request from a from Twitter's API. So that's essentially what a get request is. So anytime you kind of like fill a form, right, and you click on submit, right, and you know when you submit a form, it goes to a server. That is a post request. So any form that you fill, they are sending data to a particular website, right, or a particular server, or a particular endpoint. That is a post request. Let's go back to this. So a post request isn't essentially what it does is submit an entity to the specified resource. So when you post data to a certain server, a certain website, or a certain endpoint, it means you are just sending resources, you are sending data from your own from your front end or from anywhere they are registering your data. You are sending it to a specific endpoint, to a specific server. That's what the post request is. Now we also have the put request. Now, anytime you want to replace, right? You want to replace totally a data that you have before, that you probably have a data somewhere and it's like it's outdated, right? You want to replace all of that data, you make a put request. So a put request is actually it will just replace whatever data you have stored before. Let's say I have I logged on to like I am creating an account with a particular website now, right? And I want to, like, it's been a while, probably like a year or two, and I want to update a certain data. The put request is what those websites will allow me to do. You know, when you go to a website, you okay, let's say, for example, now I go to Twitter, right? And I go to my profile, and I click on edit profile number, right? It brings all of this stuff out, which shows, oh, this is my username, this is my bio and all. So whenever I update this, right, and I click on save, what this save does in the backend is essentially to make a put request to an API. You get to make a put request. That means, oh, this certain data has changed to make changes to this. So it will replace whatever I put in here. It will replace that with what we had before. It will change it with respect to what we had before. So that's what a post request is. So it is a kind of post request because for post now you want to post a certain data to a specific endpoint, right, to a specific server. So the put request is also like that, just that in its own case, it is replacing a data that you have before, where the post request is just like posting in new data to that endpoint. Hope we are getting that, please. Guys, did you get that?
Yes, for me. Yes, for me.
Nice. I think it's the same for everybody if no one is raising a question. So the essential ones, you see, like you have okay, nice. So the essential ones is this get, you have post, you have put, you have the delete, and this last one, the patch. Those are the essential ones that you'll probably be using on the front end. You see these trace options, blah blah blah. I've not used any of them in my years of work. But you see this get, this post, this put, this patch. Yes, those are the ones, and this delete. Those are the ones that you likely be using in any what's it called, corporation that you probably be working in. To get. So what the delete does is quite intuitive. The delete request method actually just deletes data from a specific server that you. So let's say you want to delete a specific server data from a server now. That's what the what's it called? the delete request is from. So you want to delete your particular, let's say you want to delete your account from a certain website now, like, oh, you no longer want an account with them, that you close your account and you delete that account. So what you essentially do is you are deleting your data from their website, right? So you'll be making a delete request to their website. So, and lastly, this patch one. So this patch one is when you want to update parts of your data. Now you know the post request will replace everything totally. It will replace everything to a new what's called to a new data. What the patch does is, okay, let's say you want to update a certain part of your data, not replacing everything completely. That's what the patch does. The patch will replace parts of your data. It will just like, let's say you want to update your name and your date alone. So you use a patch request to do that. So you're just updating the name and your date of birth alone. So let's say you want to change like all of your data. You want to do you change your name, you change your date of birth, change everything. Like you want to replace everything with a new data. That's what the put request is for. So hopefully all of those methods we understood them. So they are very pretty easy methods. I think we all do. So I'm not throwing any concerns or any questions. Okay. Should I use this? Okay, you see this, if you look at where my mouse is right now, you have this 200, which I mentioned before, which means your request was an okay response, like it was, oh, your request was processed and everything was fine, right? And everything was fine, right? So you have this 400, which is bad request. So bad request means you're not calling the API the right way that you should be calling it. You also have this 4.1, right? This 4.1 is telling you that you're unauthorized. So let's say you have a specific API that you want to use, but you don't have the API key. Whenever you try to make a call to that API, it will return this response code of 4.1 for you. You will not see it on your front end, though. You'll probably use it to create a text for you to see. But in the network stack, when you go and check it, you have something like unauthorized, which means you're not allowed to make such calls. You're not authorized to, you don't have a key to make such requests of their API. Hopefully you get that. So this falls to says payments required. Essentially, let's say you are trying to use Netflix now and you don't have a payment subscription, right? And you're trying to watch a video. That's this kind of error that it will throw. They just give you that, boss, go back, you have to pay money before you can access this endpoint. That's what this 4.2 means. 4.3, which is forbidden. So let's say you have a website that you want to go on, or I don't know how I can explain this forbidden. Forbidden is essentially like you cannot make a certain kind of request to a certain endpoint. That's what forbidden is. It's different from bad request. Bad request means you're not calling an API right. But forbidden is you are calling the API right, but you are not allowed. You are forbidden from doing that. So that's what forbidden is. So you also have this 4.4. It's not essential that you know all of this offhand. It's just very good to know when you are dealing with response codes. Like it's very easy when you are just trying to do something and you are saying that your API is not returning your data as you want it to. Probably you wonder what's going on. So it's always like a worthy mention to go to your network tabs and see the kind of response code that you are getting from the API. If it is like you are not making the request right, or you are not authorized, or you are forbidden, or stuff like that. So what 4.4 is not found. So let me give you an example of 4.4. Let's say I'm trying to go to a website called tired.org that does not exist, right? So whenever you go to tired.org, it will throw let's say tired.org does not exist, right? It will throw a response code of 4.4. So let's see F12. Let's go Control R again. So let's wait for this fetch part to show. Let me do okay. I think it has finished loaded. It's not showing here. It should actually show here. It will return a response code of 4.4. That means the URL that you are trying to access does not exist. Let me see if I can get. Oh, okay. It's very, very common for GitHub. Let me see if I do. Let's see. Okay. You see? So what GitHub did with it is, let's go to the network tab, right, for GitHub. And let's reload this, right? So whenever, okay, this is returning a response code for 200 because like the 200 is because GitHub they are showing something whenever you are requesting something that does not exist on their page. That's why we have the response code of 200 here. It's because of they are processing the 404 for you. Like they're telling you that, oh, this page, this part of their website that you're looking for does not exist. So you can see here that what they give you spot on is 404. Like this page that you're trying to access does not exist. So that's essentially what a 404 is. A 404, whenever you go to a website, it tells you a 404. That means it's telling you that, oh, the URL that you're trying to access does not exist. So those are the essential ones. So let's go to the 500 ones. So the 500, this 500 is telling you that it's an internal server error. Like the server that you're trying to access, it has an internal error, right? It has an internal error. Like you cannot access it at that point. 502 means bad gateway. That means the connection between you and the server is not good. It's not that your code is wrong or anything, or you're making a bad request, but it's just that the connection between you and your server is not good. It's not the best. So that's what 502 means. So 503 means service unavailable. That's also on the server side. That means your server has issues at the moment, so it is unavailable. Gateway timeout. This one is popular probably when you are using a. I think it's. Let me see if it works on. Okay, this suspender, I think, is a gateway timeout. The suspender is actually an extension on Chrome that doesn't allow all of the tabs that you open to eat up your RAM. Sure you get. So the suspender, I think, it suspends. It suspends your code by making the gateway, like the connection between you and the server, by making the gateway go to timeout. And what the timeout essentially is, for some of us that use Wi-Fi, probably is school Wi-Fi. So when you probably you have a range, like in where you have interco, and interco is like 4 hours for one. So like for a specific, like whenever you have a scratch card and you log in, right? So you have a 4 hours range for you to be able to use that Wi-Fi. So whenever that Wi-Fi, when it terminates, right, when after that 4 hours, you probably have something like a gateway timeout telling you that, oh, you cannot access this particular Wi-Fi again. That's a gateway timeout. That's what 504 is. So those are the essential ones that you have to know. So that's about response codes. Okay. So the fetch API, how do we use it? So essentially, this is where we'll be talking about asynchronous programming. And what is asynchronous programming? Asynchronous programming is where you have to get a specific data, right? Like synchronous programming is all of these ones that we've been doing that are trying to do something and it immediately occurs. When you're trying to access a data, most of the time you don't get the data instantly. You have to wait for a process time. Like the server has to process all of those details that you are sending that you need to get. It has to process that before it passes it to you, right? So that kind of thing is called asynchronous. When you have something that has to process, that is not going to like run instantly and give you an output. That probably has to like run the process and do something before it gives you an output. That is what an asynchronous program is. Something that is not going to run instantly. I think this event listener also is also is it asynchronous? I don't really think so. I don't think so. But you just have it in mind that what an asynchronous program is something that you run instantly and does not give you a response instantly. It might look like we are getting a response instantly when we go to our browser, but that's just because of the speed that we are of the browser and of the API that we are using, and also this this thing that we are seeing here, this dots then that we're going to explain in a bit, right? So essentially, you calling APIs, they are asynchronous things. When you want to, almost all APIs that you call, every API that you call, not almost all, every API that you call, you make an asynchronous call to them. Because one, you don't know the amount of data that is coming, right? And two, you don't know the time that it will take for you to be able to get all of those data. That's why we always put asynchronous programming to use. It is very, very it's one of the most important things in any website or any JavaScript code or any website building per se. You have to always take note of what asynchronous programming is. Asynchronous programming is probably you are trying to fetch data from a particular website or endpoint. You don't know the amount of data that is coming, one, and you don't know the time that it will take to collate all of the data, two. And there's this thing for any user. You don't want to go to a website and it takes forever to load. No, you don't want that. So what asynchronous programming allows us to do is it allows us to perform specific actions, right? While we can also do other things. Do you get? That's kind of like the niche for asynchronous programming. It allows you to perform something that will probably take time, but instead of it stopping, right? Instead of it stopping the other parts of your code, it allows the other part of your code to run. The alert from JavaScript is an asynchronous program because whenever that is running, it stops whatever you have from running. Like the code will not continue unless that's finished running. Although that's an asynchronous program that has not been fully like implemented. It's just for you to be able to see things. But that's what an asynchronous program is. An asynchronous program is essentially something that has to run over a time, right? That has to run over a certain time. And you don't know the time. I don't know the amount of data that you're getting. So you have to account for that. That's why asynchronous programming was actually brought to life, was invented. So you get. So what calling an API is an asynchronous program. So hopefully we can hear me and we are understanding in bits. So if you do not understand what I've explained now, so kindly tell me so I can re-explain, please. So anybody with any difficulty so far so good, you have something that you're not understanding. Can you let me know? So probably if you finish this weather app by today, which I don't think should be possible, but if it is, we'll be we'll be doing kind of like a revision over the concepts that we've learned and trying to make another app that we'll probably build together by God's grace. So hopefully all goes well. So we don't have questions, right? Okay.
Hello?
Fatma, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Please, that line, God, I'm using my phone. I can't see the line very well. But immediately under that function, get data,
Okay.
that console the log. Sorry, were you the one that manually wrote this down, or you copied the API from that weather? There's weather,
This
there's a
one,
question mark, there is
this one,
Q.
Ari.
Yes.
Okay. We'll talk about it now. So it is kind
We
of
spoke about it.
yeah, we've not spoken about it at all.
Oh, sorry. I just joined again with my phone. My stem went off. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So give me like 3 seconds. I need to get water. Sorry. Boss, water, please. Thank you. All right. Essentially, we'll be discussing this current weather API. Let's go to their app. So now, I mentioned that for any website, right, they'll give you a documentation for any API, for any backend person that has sense, or for any company that will have sense. You must always have a documentation for their APIs. Like, okay, this particular API, what it does, how you can make a call to it, how you can get certain data from it. So every documentation, every API essentially has to have a documentation because it is required. As a front-end guy, I definitely do not know what the back-end guy has cooked, right? So I have to see a documentation to see, oh, okay, this is an API. How can I use it? How can I call it, right? So that's essentially what we'll be checking this documentation for. So on the openweathermap.org site, they have this /current, which gives you an overview of what their API is. So we'll be reading through that now. Let me drink this water. Okay, so they are following themselves. They're advertising. They say, okay, access current weather data for any location on Earth, including over 200,000 cities. Yeah, blah 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 blah. We collect and process weather data, blah 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 blah. And the data is available in JSON, XML, or HTML format. Cool. Now, what is JSON format? Is one thing that we'll have to mention again. So JSON is essentially this thing that we have here. This is JSON. This is how JSON is. JSON is essentially just a data, right? A data set that contains a lot of objects. or a lot of data. Whenever you have something that is like this, that starts with a bracket, right, and ends with a bracket, it can even start with an array itself, like the one we saw yesterday. Let me open that up. This placeholders thing. Where is placeholders? This is normal. It's okay. What's going on? I have to find this. Okay, this is it. Now you can see this one now. It begins with what? With an array, right? And you have all of these objects inside of it. That's what this one is. But you can see this one with so you can see this one. It begins with a curly braces, which signifies that it's an object, right? So you can have data responses. It depends on how the backend guy structures data response. So you can have it in form of an object like this, or you can have it in form of an array. So whatever you want to do with it, it's up to you. You get. So you have two ways of getting it. Might actually be fully an object, or you can have objects inside of an array. So either way, that they send data in either of the two formats. So you can see now that for us to write an object in JavaScript, right, you have to write something like, where is that? So you have to write something like const API is equals to, then you have all of these curly braces and the data, right? So this part here, the curly braces and the data and the ending curly braces is the JSON part. That's what JSON essentially is. JSON is just like data gongo itself, not assigning it to any value. You can see that from this API now, we are just getting the what's it called, the object itself. So that's essentially what JSON is. JSON is the object that contains data, or in any case, it might be an array like this one. This is essentially just the array without actually assigning it to any variable. That's what the JSON is. So if I write a list of objects now that has a whole lot of data, let me just copy this over and over again. So all of this part here is going to be the JSON part, is what is referred to as JSON. JSON is just a way of like structuring data. So data most of the time is sent to us whenever we make a request in form of JSON, because it's from JavaScript. It's just think of JSON as the son of JavaScript. Simply, the son of JavaScript that gets data. That's what JSON is. Because essentially all it ever returns is data. It does nothing more. You cannot program in JSON. It's not even a thing. So JSON is just an interface that returns data alone. It's the son of JavaScript that returns data. Simple. So hopefully we got that. So it won't sound very distant to you whenever somebody mentions, oh, this is what we are doing the data in a JSON format. Probably like, what's this one again? So JSON is essentially just the data that is returned in form of an object or an array. So you have XML formats, which is a markup language format. Nobody really uses that anymore. An HTML format. So this is the methods by which these open weather map guys, they return their data, right? So you see how to make an API call. You don't have to know all of these things offhand. You probably have to like understand basic concepts of programming, like you want to do something, but you don't have to know these things offhand. It just provide it to you. Any company or any API website, they will provide to you a documentation of how you can make a call to their website. Now you can see in the beginning you have api.openweathermap.org.data.25/ right? So what this is essentially is this base URL that we have here. So whenever a base URL is common, it's like always good practice to write a base URL like this and give it a base so that you'll be able to just call it anywhere. Whenever you have a common base URL, so I won't just be copying and repeating this code over and over again. It will make our code self look ugly. Like imagine if I had to put all of this base here, this one here that is here now. So let me just put it here now. Let me just copy what's inside. Because essentially what we are doing here, API.base, is we are getting the value that is here. So let me remove that now. Okay, so I'm put this now. You see that it will just make our code insanely longer. You don't want to do that. You want to keep your code as concise, as clean as possible. So all of these little tricks, they are really good to help you in navigating like I'm writing clean code. So instead of writing all of this URL several times, because it's not one time that you probably want to use them, so you can just do something like an object like this, and you can store the API values like the key and the base in it. So you put the base here, you put the key here. So the key, if I were to put this key here to look ugly when I have to put it here, to be very, very long, and you don't want that. So that is that. Mm. So essentially, when you call this API, you can see now that you have this, whether you don't have to memorize their URLs offhand. You go to their website and look at how they are calling it. So let's say you want to call, so on this API now, you can only make a latitude and longitude. You can only get the latitude and longitude for the specific, for this API, this particular API. It's not the one that we're using. This particular API just gets the latitude and longitude. So you can see that they have a template for that, which is a lat is equals to a curly braces, in curly braces, this lat of the thing. So what you're passing in here is going to be the latitude of the specific location that you're looking for, right? And the longitude is going to be the longitude of the specific location that you're looking for. So you're going to be the one to fill in the values yourself. That's why you have them in curly braces like this. This part of that you have in black is the part that they provide for you, right? It's their own URL. But the longitude and latitude is the part that I want to be supplying to them, like, okay, this is the latitude I want to use, or this is the longitude I want to use. And the app ID is essentially where you pass the API key, so the key that you have. So let me go to the API that we're using itself. Go. I want to see the example that we're using. Let me check one more. Okay, I think it's this one. Let me check. What the Q my degree units metric. Okay. That's a single weather. I'm coming. I just want to check the one that we're using, the API that we're using, so I can use that to explain why our API call will be the way it is. I think it's this one. Probably does not seem okay. Okay, let's just go down and see. Okay. Now, you see, this is the one that we're using. Built-in API request by city name. So you can, they say you can call a city, you can call by city by name. What they mean by you can call the API, and essentially what they call is you are trying to get data from an API, right? Or you are trying to send data to an API. It depends on what you are trying to use it for. So you can call by city name or state code or country code. Please note that the searching by state available only for the US locations. Okay, so for if you want to search by a particular state, you can only search by states in the US, but if it is other cities, you can search for the cities of the world. Should you get? So and how do you make the API call? So the API call is this, they'll give you the way you use their URL, right? So you have API.openWeatherMap. This is their whole URL, right? This one, whether into question mark dash key. You don't have to know all of that. You don't have to know any of that actually. So it just depends on how they want you to know to use it. That's what you're going to pass in. Now you can see this part that you have that is highlighted in red. That is essentially the part that you want to be putting your values. You have no issue with their own API. You have no, you don't want to tamper with whatever they have. The URL that they are giving you, the address that they are giving you is what you're going to use. But essentially where they grade out It might not be red in other platforms, but essentially where they gray out is where you'll be passing your data, right? The data that you're going to be using for that query. Now, a common thing is whenever you see question mark dash q, it essentially means you're trying to make a query, and what the query is you're trying to make a call to the API to make a request of that API. So a query, then you're querying the city name from open weather map. That's all this is here. Now, let me go back to explain this code now and why this is the way it is. Is that now you can see now that the API.base is this base URL here. I think I should probably just put this in for simplicity's sake. Let's see. Now, I just want to use this to show you guys. Okay. Now, so okay. Now, this is essentially how you would call their API, right? You call HTTPS, right? Then you call weathermark.org.this, then query. Now, from the API, they said after this queue is equal to whatever you have to pass in there has to be a city name. And what city name will be to has to be a string, but you don't really need to know. So the city name is what we're going to be passing here. Now, let me check. You know, I loaded their can you all see this? You know, I loaded their this thing. I called their data before, and I returned this all of this data for me. Now let's look at the API. This is the API here. You see HTTPS, then API, the open weather, the map, then it goes on and on. Then this question mark, then Q. Then you can see here that I'm querying what my degree. Immediately after the Q, what I'm querying is my degree, right? That's all I'm querying. So that's what their API needs. Where's that stuff again? And put it beside each other. So what they want us to shit. So what they want us to put in immediately after this queue is equals to is the city name that we want to query. It is here in our URL too. This part here, this part that says my degree. Hopefully you can see my highlights. Can you see it? Because I want to change it now so you guys can see that it will change with respect to the city. Can you guys see my highlights? Like it's the highlights of my degree now.
Yes, we can.
Cool. So let's change this to Accra now. So you see that the data really loads and Q here, it changes to Accra and the longitude and latitude will change and the data will change with respect to that. So whenever you have an API, just the documentation is enough to tell you if it is well documented. I'm going to tell you categorically, there are some people that will not document their API very well. That you have to be kind of like an expert to know what you have to do on that API. But for the basic ones, an API is always very, very easy to work with once you know what you have to pass in. You don't need to do any other thing. Now, this after the queue, what they want us to pass in is a city name. That's why, like after our queue here, what we are passing is a city name, right? This Accra. If you want to change this now, let's change this to London, right? So if you change that to London, you can see that the longitude and latitude also changes. The ID changes. All of the weather condition it will change. So we have here in our query that the query is London, right? That's pretty simple. That's all we need. Now you can see in the last part of the query, they said, and app ID is equals to API key. That means they want us to pass the API key to this app ID thing. So you can see now that on our own app ID too, we are passing what? We're passing this API key, which is this one here. So you can see from our code that that's what we are passing in here, this one here. So an API is essentially very easy to use once they have proper documentation, issues safe. But once you get the basics of how you can use an API, you know that okay, it is up to you to maneuver and get whatever you want from your APIs. Do you get? So an API, a well-documented API will give you all that you will need. So it's just up to you to make certain and different calls to the API with respect to what you need. So let's say I want to make a call to this API now. I'll just change the city name to get the city that I need, and the API key I'll pass it in, and that's what I really need. So let's say I want to pass in the city name, the state code, and the country code. All I have to do is pass in the city name, put a comma, the state code, put a comma, and the country code, and that will still work fine. Do you get? So essentially that's that. Okay, I wanted to show you guys a project. Okay. So this is a project that I made actually. So should I run this? Let's run this first. Give me a sec. Yes. Now you can see that what I'm doing here
Sorry,
is
your
my screen is
kind of blinding.
yeah, I zoomed it
Why
in
did you
back. Yeah. Is it better now? Hopefully it is. Okay. I want to show you this movie database website. So they allow you to make requests to their APIs. So they are like a website that has all of this movie datas and like datas about almost all the movies that you know about that you can possibly think about. So you can see here just introduction, and let's just go to let's say for example movies, right? I want to be able to get details for a movie. Now, this is essentially how you get it. You see, they have the slash movie ID. What this is because the reason why they put slash movie is because they always have a base URL, right? A base URL is the URL that would, you see, this is their own base URL here, api.themoviedb.org slash movie ID. So this is essentially where you have to pass in the movie ID. The movie ID, you probably know it before, then you pass it in there, right? And the API key, you pass it in here. Here that you have the API key. So let's say our API key is something. Let me do this. So let's say this is our API key now. You see that it gets passed here, and that's what you need to do. Once you send your request, it will generate a response for you. So that is essentially what I did in this app here, right? So I used their API. I didn't even use the base and all. So I just use the API directly. So I'm trying to get a popular movie. I'm passing in my API key directly because this was one of the first projects that I made. I put my API key there. So and language, all of this is just something that they made by themselves. So the API is here. The API key is what I'm passing in here, which is this part here, and that's all I really need to do. So they'll provide you with everything that you need. What you have to pass into the API, they will tell you on the API documentation. So it's just left to you to pass that value in, and you get your responses. If their server does not have any issues, right? So if their server does not have any issues, you get your response fine and solid. So mm, okay, this is serious. I want to show you guys this thing actually. Okay. I guess today's not the day for this one because now this is not really attempted import error not exported from React icons. That's I guess today is not the day I show you guys this thing. But it's just a way like I made API calls, several API calls to the website, and I got several details from the website, and I used that in implementing my website. I should tap this thing and show you guys. It's 10:30. When should we take the break? Is it? It should be by 11.
I think 11 is fine. 11 to 11:30.
Yeah, it should be by 11. Okay. Give me a second. I want to show you guys. Okay. Oh, I guess this is why it's not working. So let's go back and tackle that. Slash, let's be slash something. TI. Okay. Okay. So this is essentially the app that I created actually. So I'm getting like several data from this movie TV API. So I get different like popular TV shows at that moment. So you see all of the popular TV shows at the moment. Then if you go down, you see the popular movies like you have Twins Man, one of my favorites actually. So you have all of this. So you get different data from the APIs. So essentially, an API just allows you like access to all of these data, and it's really cool because normally you wouldn't have access to some of those data, and it's really annoying. So in real life sense, you need to have what's it called? To have APIs. So APIs allow you to cool things. So you can see it loads more. We have Timeout, one of my favorites actually. So and stuff like that. So that's what an API allows you to do. So let's say we go to the top here. So TV shows. So you have all of this, the current TV shows, and you can sort. So in the API, in their APIs too, they allow you to do sort. You see it changes with respect to my sortings. So on TV, you see that it changes also. The top rated to also change. So that's what an API allows you to do. It allows you the flexibility of actually going through a certain website and getting data from them. So hopefully we all understood that. And for the sake of argument, so this project is paying me. I've been trying to push it for so long, like to push it to a real domain. It's just not good. That's why it's not my portfolio project. Yes, Victory.
Yeah, for this particular one, did you have to make use of API key? Or
yes, you use.
There's no key?
Yeah, there's definitely APIs. There are API keys involved, right? So for anything, essentially, you have to use API keys. Let me show you. So if you go to their websites now, right, even in here, it's asking for API key. So if you don't have their API key, if you've not registered with them, you won't be able to like use their API keys to get the results. So I have my own personal API key that I will use to get certain responses from their websites. So almost all APIs would ask you for an API key. Rarely any will not use an API key. You rather probably not notice it, but you have an API key. That answer your question. So,
Yeah.
so this won't chop up my RAM and the classroom can let me quickly close this up. Clear. Right. So moving on to fetch. How to use fetch. What is a fetch? A fetch essentially, as we've mentioned, is what allows you to make certain requests.
Sorry, please. I want to ask something. I'm seeing this metric and app ID.
And it's not in the
Yes.
yeah, okay. So let me show you. The app ID is there actually. So the app ID, this is see the app ID. If you go to documentation, so it's here, and the app ID is equal to what we have as the API key, right? Which is this API key that we our own API key. So the API key is essentially going to be your own personal API key that you get. So this is what, but the units and is equal to metric. So that's one of the things we're going to be mentioning. Now there are times where a particular API, they will give you the kind of like parameters, the kind of queries that you can make on their APIs. See, exactly what I wanted to say now is exactly what is on their API now. You see, you have it here, parameters. You see this Q1, they said it is required. That means you must pass in a Q parameter for the API to work. So the Q parameter is essentially going to be the city name or the state code or the country code divided by comma. But if you are using only one, it's going to be a city name only. So you have to pass this in. Now, the app ID is also very required. So because without the app ID, you won't be able to get access to their data, right? So this is also said to be required. So now you have these optional ones, right? I'm sorry, give me a second. So these optional ones are something that you can pass if you want to, or you can leave them out. So I passed them because I wanted I wanted to be able to get certain metrics. You get now what metrics is this unit part that I'm passing in, which is an optional part, is a unit for measurement and measurement in terms of like temperature and all of this pressure. We want like a standard way of measurement. So there's a standard way of measurement which is going to be giving us the temperatures in Fahrenheit and stuff like that. But the metric one will give us the temperatures in Celsius, right? So that's why this was added. This unit is equal to metrics. And if you want to add parameters like this, you have to put this ampersand sign here, the and sign. So you see and units. You see and units is units with an S. If I go ahead and change this to and units with a single T, it will not work. You get a request like 404, like what you're trying to access does not exist because it's not units, it's units, right? And they give you what you can pass in. To that certain metric, the imperial, the units, and the standard. They have it. Say, all right, I'm back. We have the standard, you have the metric, you have the imperial. So let's say I go back to our code now and I try to check out. I change this unit to be standard. Now you see that our code will also change. Now let's say in here we have what can I say? The temperature now is 10.58, right? You can see now from temp here is 10.58. Now let me change this from metric in our URL to standard, right? So when I change that to standard, it's loading up. So the temperature now is 284.08. This is in Kelvin actually. So it's not in degrees Celsius again, or Fahrenheit. So that's essentially what the measurements are. They allow you to be able to like get different data with respect to the time or with respect to different measurements that you need. So a parameter, how you add a parameter to a certain URL is you put the ampersand like this and sign, then you put the parameter that you want to add units, then you pass in the value, which is the standard metric or imperial. So let's say I was to change this to imperial now. Imperial. So we also have a different set of data. So you see the temperature now is 51.24, which is different from what we had before. So that's why that's them. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, yes, you did.
Okay, cool. So I'm moving on to explaining what the fetch does, right? And essentially what the fetch is and how to use it is what I want to be explaining now. The fetch, how does it work? The fetch just takes in the URL. It's very, very simple to use. Whenever you want to use a fetch method, you just do fetch, right? Then in brackets, and that's all. That's all basically that you need to put. Now, as in the brackets now, the fetch is a function, right? So the function essentially allows you to pass in a URL that you want to call a certain method on. So let's say I want to get this URL that is here now, this one that I have here. It's a URL, right? So if that's what I want to get the method on, I'll just do a fetch and I'll paste it. I'm not copying this. Control C, Control V. See, that's all you have to do. So essentially, home. Control Z. Control Z plus. So you see now, this
Sorry, please, Mr. Abdullahi.
yeah.
Is an HTTP method?
Which one?
Fetch is an HTTP method.
Yeah, fetch is an HTTP method. Yeah, it allows you to be able to call certain responses.
Okay.
Sorry guys, give me. Okay, let's see. Transmission. So the fetch method allows you to be able to call certain data to your it allows you to be able to call certain it just allows you to be able to call your URL, right? That's all it does. Now by default, the method that this fetch defaults to is a get method. Like essentially almost every time you go to a website to so by default, anytime you go to a website, let's say you go to Twitter or anywhere, you are essentially just you are making a get request from that website. Anytime you go to a website, you log onto a website or you go to a specific URL and you're getting data from it and it's displaying something, you're actually making a get request. So that's why this fetch API and this fetch and most code method that we get from JavaScript, it's by default goes to a get method. So that whenever you put you pass in a URL, it will get a certain response from that URL. Do we get that, or should we explain, please? I need answers.
Please, can you, is it the same thing as get?
Can you explain?
Sorry, what?
Is it the same thing as get? Is the fetch also the same thing? You know, you said that we can have get, post, put down. Is fetch also like get?
No. The fetch is not like get to. The fetch allows you to call different methods like post, get. You see, we get to that now. So what fetch is? I'm just saying that the kind of request method that this fetch that it defaults to, right, is get. Do you get? Unless you specifically stated that okay, what I'm trying to do now is a post method, or it's a put method, or it's a patch method, or it's a delete method. What it defaults to, it's a get method. That's what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It's not get, it's not the same thing as get. Do you get?
Okay.
Yeah. So what it defaults to by default, it is a get method that it does. Like it tries to get data from an API. That's what it does, right? So back to class. So, but if like, peradventure you want to add in a parameter like, okay, this what you are doing now is we're not getting data from an API. You want to post specific data to an API. You want to be able to like what's it called? You want to post specific data to an API, or you want to patch it, or you want to delete it. Then you add a comma, right? So the request method that you're going to use is what you're going to pass in next. Now, the first parameter is what is going to be the URL that you want to perform the action on, right? Now, the second parameter is going to be the action that you want to perform. So if it's a get, you specify it as get like this. You get. If it's a post, you specify it as post. If it's a delete, you specify it as delete. If it's a patch, you specify it as patch. Do you get? So that's how you pass in a URL. Like that's how you use the fetch method, right? So the fetch essentially you pass in the first argument that comes to the fetch would be the URL that you want to perform your action on. Is that clear, everybody? I think it's clear. So let's say peradventure you are not performing any action on like the URL itself. You just want to get data from there. Then you don't need to pass in the second parameter. But what if if what you are doing that's what I'm saying. If what you are doing is different from a get method, then you definitely have to state this second parameter, which is going to be the request method that you are making. So it can be a post, it can be a put, it can be a delete, it can be I think that's all actually. A delete, a post, a patch, then a put. Do you get? So those are the things that you pass in as the second parameter here. Do you get? Now, essentially, what this fetch does now is it returns a response. I said a response, a promise. Now, that is going to sound very, very funny. Like, what is a promise? We're just talking about sending data and receiving data. What is a promise again? It's nothing complicated, nothing too complicated. Sorry, guys, I just have to say this. Can you know? Sorry. Sorry, give me a sec. I just have to snap this and send to someone. Yeah, snap now. Let me take a snap. So let me just take this. Okay. Now, coming back here. Now, so this second parameter, when we pass it in, then it comes to the main thing. What is promise? What is a promise? So a promise. Oh God, I just sent it to you. I'm sending it to the wrong person. Sorry, Elise, could you send that to me on WhatsApp, please? This image that I sent to you. Can you send it to me on
Okay,
WhatsApp?
sure. Okay.
So promises. Okay, and then so what's the promise? It said a promise object represents the blah, 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 the eventual completion of an asynchronous operation. You know, I tell you that whenever you're getting a like whenever you're making a request to an API, it's an asynchronous operation in the sense that you have to wait for the data to come. You don't know the kind of data, you don't know the time that it takes. That's what essentially makes it asynchronous. You don't know the time that it will take to run the data. That's one of the reasons why that's one of the reasons why this is called asynchronous promises, asynchronous operation. So the promise object represents the completion or failure of an asynchronous operation. So the promise might actually return a failure or a completion. A failure in the sense that let's say you make a bad request to a certain API, or you are making something, or you're writing a wrong URL, then it will return a failure in that sense. But let's say you are returning something like you are making the right calls to the API, it will return the right results for you. So let's see. Now a promise is a proxy for a value. What a proxy is just kind of like a placeholder, right? It's a placeholder for the value that is not known when the promise is created. This essentially means that what a promise is a placeholder for the data that is coming that you have not yet received, right? So that's essentially what a promise is. A promise is what you use for your app to know that okay, I'm expecting a data, but I don't know what it is yet, right? So I'm using this promise as a default placeholder. So it's kind of like just like okay, I'm expecting something, but we don't know what it is yet. Do you get? So there are different states for promises. You have the pending, the fulfilled, and the rejected. The pending state is when the process is still processing, right? When the promise is still processing. The fulfilled is when it returns a response to you, and the rejected is when the operation is failed, right? When you make a bad request or there's an internal server error, we are not receiving any response. That's when the promise is in a rejected state. When it is fulfilled, it's returning a response and you can see a response. And when it is pending, it is when it's in that initial state when it is still processing. Do you get? So that's essentially what a promise is. So a promise allows you to perform certain actions, to make certain what's it called, to create a placeholder for your apps, like for your data they are bringing in. Now, let's do console dot log, right? Then end. Now, look at this. So the way you call a promise is immediately after the fetch, like you have here, right? Immediately after this fetch, you do what is called a dot then, right? You write a dot then like this. What this dot then does is it allows us to call a promise. It allows us to write a promise. Because what the fetch will return is a promise, and a promise is something that is pending, it's a placeholder. It's not really our data, right? So we call this dot then function on it, right? So the dot then function is very, very intuitive, it's very simple. What this means is okay, immediately after this first operation runs, then we want to do something else. Do you get? That's what the dot then means. After the fetch, then this is what we want to do next. That's what the dot then is. Now, the way you call it dot then is you write a parenthesis like this, right? So in the parentheses, you are going to define what you're going to write the callback function. So what the callback function is whenever the fetch it finish operation, it finishes. Oh God, mercy. Why am I listening? Whenever the fetch method finishes its operation, you want to be able to call this function for something to happen, right? So let's say whenever the data we get data, we want to perform a certain action, right? So that's what this fetch method, this dot then, the first dot then is for. We want to be able to call, or we want to be able to perform a certain action when we receive our data. So we write something like response to be equals to response dot JSON, right? Now, what does this mean? We are writing something like response, then an arrow to be response.json. This is essentially an arrow function, right? You know, an arrow function, the way we write it is, let's say, const age equals then you do whatever. So let's say you want to console.log name, right? So you can write a single arrow function like this. Let's say you don't have a code that goes to multiple lines, right? You can write an arrow function like this without the curly braces or anything. So if it is like a function with multiple lines, then you won't do this. You have to put the curly braces. But if it's just a function with a single line that is doing just a single thing like this, you can just write it without a curly brace. So that's exactly what we are doing here. We are writing a function without the curly braces because what we are doing is just a simple action. So we are passing in a parameter called response, right? To be equal to response.json. What is that? What does that mean? So what that means is this response can be anything. It's just a parameter. I can name it R, I can name it E, I can name it anything that I want. Do you get? As long as it just corresponds to what we have here. So I think it's kind of like a convention. You just have to know that whenever you're calling a response like this, whenever you're calling a get method, so let's remove this patch so that we won't get confused. So whenever we're calling a fetch method, right, you always have to attach this dot then thing to it. So and essentially what the dot then is, let's just put it on the single line so that we don't get too confused. So and essentially what the dot then is just a promise that takes a callback function. And the way we write a callback function is if I want to write it in the normal function way, I'll do it like this, right? I'll do it like this, then I'll do curly braces, right? Then this is how I'll do it. I think I have to do something like this actually. So this is how I write a nameless callback function, right? You remember from the last class that we've done, like we wrote when you want to write a callback function that is an arrow function, you just write the name, then the arrow, right? Then you have a function. But since it's just a single parameter and it's just a single line of code that we want to write, you can abstract that into this. Instead of the reason why we always have that double parameters that we have like this, that we always have something like this, that we always have something like this, that you have a double brace is because we might have more than one parameter that we want to pass. But in case we have just a single parameter that we need, we can just remove this these normal brackets altogether and put the parameter that we need. So that's why we have something like this, so that it won't sound it won't look very funny to you. What we are passing, what this E is the response that we're getting from this part fetch API. Do we understand? Like whenever we call a fetch API, right? It makes a request to the server, right? And it will get the response for us. Now after the response, we then want to do something. That's what this dot then is for, right? Now, what's the response? The response from this is what we want to perform the action on. That's why we're passing that response in as the parameter, right? So it might, for intuitive sake, let's just make Control Z, Control escape. God. So for argument's sake, so that we just understand what is going on, so I won't abstract things. Now what this fetch will do is it will return a response for us, right? So whenever it returns that response for us, we then want to do something. That's what this dot then is for. So after we get the response we are going to pass it in as a parameter, right? So I can do it like this, so I won't get confused. Like the normal way that we recognize it is by putting this normal bracket here and putting the response there. And we know that this is the parameter, right? Then when we have that parameter, I want to perform a certain function, right? And that function is just .json. So this .json method allows us to turn any response that you have into a JSON format. That's what the .json means. That means the response that we're getting, if it's not in a .json format before, we are composed, like we are making
Hell, I don't know if you're talking, but we cannot hear you.
Oh my God. Imagine. I was speaking all throughout. So what I was saying is the response and the JSON format, right? The reason why we are doing this is because we have a lot of ways that we can have responses. We can have it in XML format or in JSON format or in HTML format. And those formats, they are not easy, like XML and HTML formats, they are not easy to implement in our JavaScript file, right? So the JSON format is the easiest to work with. That's why we are training this JSON method to this response so that any response that we get, it will be turning it to a JSON file. That's essentially what this .json into bracket does. It turns whatever response we are getting a a JSON format file. Do you get? So I think we should take a break, right? Probably if you have time to check the code, or you should just use it to rest actually. So when we come back, we'll continue explaining what the fetch method does, because I think it's the most convulsing and confusing part there. The rest is just easy things. So let's take a break now. By 11:30, we'll be back. Is that fine? Yes, I guess that's fine, right?
Yes, yes, it's fine.
I'm not mess paper. Is that you guys cannot hear me talking now? No one is talking. I can't hear anyone. Or you guys are not talking at all.
We can
We
hear
can
you.
hear you.
Oh, imagine that. You guys could hear me. Ah, shit. Give me a minute. I just want to push this my GitHub actually. Apparently, it's not cool. Anyways, let's get over that. Okay, so the fetch. So please, I need someone, just someone to signify if you can hear me properly.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes. So my microphone is control. So the fetch, right? That's what we're explaining what the fetch is. So essentially, we mentioned that the fetch is just a way of calling several methods on our API, right? So we want to be able to like call different methods on our API, like call a get method or a post or a push or I say push, a post, a put or a delete or an update method, something like that, yeah, on our fetch. So that's essentially what it allows us to do. And we said by default, it defaults to getting a specific data. If it did not state anything, all it does is it just gets a specific data from that URL that you passed in. Now, and what after that, after we are getting the URL, we definitely want to be able to do something with the with the response or with the response that we are getting from that particular server, right? So that's what this this dot then is for. Because the way the fetch API would return the response for us, it will return it in a way such that we won't be able to use it directly in our code, right? It will return it in form of a promise. And whenever we have a promise like that, we always want to evaluate it. So that's what we use this dot then for, right? So the dot then is a function, or let's call it a method, right? So what it does is you just pass in the argument. An argument necessarily does not have to be this response. You might name it anything, but you just pass it to the argument. What this argument will hold is the response that is coming from this fetch API. Normally we used to pass arguments into a function, but in this case, since we are chaining it to, what I mean by chain is this dot. Whenever you write a dot before something, right? Let's say you have a fetch that you write dot then, or you have console.log. That means this dot you are chaining log to this console, right? So we are chaining then to this fetch method. So whatever response we get here gets passed down to this dot then without us actually having to pass it down as a parameter somewhat like we used to get. So this is dot then here. We are chaining it into this response, right? Then we are now returning whatever that is into this response.json. Now, so that we can see what that does actually. Now, what I did here was I did a fetch, right? It will get a response. That response, we are passing it down to this next dot, the dot then that comes at me. So in that dot then, we are passing in the arguments as a response, right? Then we are console logging that response value dot JSON. Now, before I do this response dot JSON, let me remove this response that dot JSON and let's see what this will do, right? So let me take this out. So I'm taking it out of the function get data so that it will evaluate without us having to run this fetch this get data first. So all right, and we can see here now that we are getting a response from script.js line 19. You can see it here, right? We're getting a response from script.js line 19. So let's check the place that we're consoling it is the line 19, right? So what we get from that is all of this value here. We have all of this body, this header, all of these things. This is the kind of response that the API will give to us, right? And it's not really profound that we have something like this. And even you see, it says status of 404. That means it was a bad request, right? So let's go and see what's going on and why it's a bad request. Oh, okay, this part here. We have to pass in a value, a specific value, not this whatever that we have. So let me just pass in Lagos, right? So if I check that again, now we see that we have a new kind of, this one does not throw any error, right? Because we are getting a data, we are getting a response from it. So you see, it returns all of this gibberish and all of this nonsense that we don't really need. What we need is it's just a file that generates all of the data that we need in a JSON format, sort of like this. Did I close that out? So we want something that would look like this, right? So whenever you call a response without actually putting the .json, this is what is going to, something like this is what is going to that is going to return for you. And this is just gibberish, it's nonsense. We don't really understand what is going on here. So whenever we do response to JSON, it will turn the file into a JSON file that we can understand. So let's say let's do .json now, right? So when we do a .json now, we can see that it's saying the promise is a pending promise, right? That means it is still evaluating it and it is not yet fulfilled, right? Which is supposed to actually give me a minute. I just want to show you what this would be. Oh, imagine that. Give me a minute, I'll explain this in a minute. I just want to set it up first. Shift home X, right? That's interesting. What's going on? We are fetching, right? And after fetching, we are console logging, we are tuning that. Yeah, okay. We are fine now. So it was the fact that I was putting a console log here, that was why one of the reasons why it was throwing an error. So what did I do? Now essentially, let me remove this part here. Or let me comment it out. Now, right. So this line here, let me put a CL there. Now, you know what I said was whenever you call a fetch this way, right? We call a fetch, then we chain a dot then to actually get the response. And when we get the response without actually putting this JSON file, right? It returns a whole lot of gibberish for us, like we had seen before. It turns this whole lot of nonsense, right? That we don't really understand or we don't really need. Status code of 200, that means we're calling the right thing. So we don't understand. There's no data here that we can see. It just looks like nonsense, right? So if we add the .json, right, that gives us a bit more information. So the information that it gives us is okay, the promise is actually pending, right? What does it mean to be pending? That means it is still processing the data. And that's why, like, whenever you want to get the data, it's actually a two dot thens that you do. And the first dot then is for you to actually change it to a JSON file like this, right? Like whenever you have any data that you're getting from any website, you first use the first dot then, like to change the data into a JSON type that will be understandable, right? So when after you do that, then you write another dot then, which is this one here. So in this dot then, what you now do is you'll be able to get the data directly and log it wherever you want to use that. So let me just do this. You have to remove this console log that you have. Now, so the first dot then, what it does is you have to use it to do what to JSON the response that you're getting. In the sense that what the browser will return to you in terms of response is a whole lot of gibberish that you don't understand, right? And we really don't want that. We don't want that anyways. We only need the data, right? So we use the first dot then to turn this to a JSON file, which we can then read. Now, after the first dot then you close the brackets, right? Like the dot then like this. You see, it's on a single line now. Like you have all of these things, dots then the first bracket and the last bracket, right? Now the next dot then is what that's where you now have your data. The last then, so it will get a response from this. It will turn it down, right? And we get the data from that response here. So we are passing in data down, and we are constantly logging what that value of data is. So what this will do is it will just take the data from this response and it will bring it here. So you can actually name this anything. It might not necessarily be data. We can name it A, for example, and it will still do the same thing. We still have our data. You can see now that we have all of this base station, clouds, then the coordinates, then the date, the ID, then the mean temperature, the fields like the ground level and all of that. We still have all of that here, even if when you change it to A. So essentially, how we call a fetch method, let me just take that from the top again. Let's see if there's any questions. Okay. So how we call the fetch method is you write the URL, like this whole API URL, right? You write it down like this. Okay, fine. After that, then you call this first dot then method on it. And what that does is you'll be able to use that to return your file in a JSON format. So you write it like this. Response is equals to the arrow sign, then response.json, right? Something like this. So what this will do is it will turn the response that I get from the browser into a JSON file. So that is also easy to read for us on the front end. So you now add this last dot then, right? And you console.log whatever that value is to just to sit in the console. But normally what we will do is we will return whatever that value is. Do you get? So that's how we go about these things. Hopefully my this thing was clear. My explanation was clear. Hello, please do we understand my explanation? Guys, do you have anything that you want to ask? Because I want to give out a quiz now actually.
Please, can you go over that promises again, I beg? Please.
Okay, no problem. So essentially, yes, what you have, what you have is this way. You have a fetch, right? The fetch, what it takes is it takes in a URL and it takes in one other parameter where you can state the kind of request method that you want to do. If it's a post, a patch, or a delete, or anything like that, you can put it there. But we're not like dealing with that now, right? So we really need the URL. Now, immediately after the fetch, you do something like a dot then like this. Let's just use this line here. So you don't necessarily have to put it on the same line, like immediately after this, then you put a dot like this. You don't need to do that. So you can come to the next line and put a dot, then JavaScript to recognize it that okay, I tried to chain it to the
Please,
first.
sorry, please, Abdullah, I'm so sorry. I want to understand each line. That line 26, notice that you
Mm-hmm.
put it in a string literal. So you are fetching that variable API dot base, then you
API,
are
yeah.
concatenating it with a weather question mark, right? Is
Yes,
it like
definitely.
in our URL there are usually things like this. So instead of writing it manually, you are putting it in a dynamic way. Is that what you are trying to do at that line
Yeah,
26?
exactly. Like if you look at this line
Okay.
18 now, you have this URL.
Oh,
You see?
oh, oh,
So
oh,
this
oh.
URL is the one that is in this API dot base, right? So
Yes,
instead
yes.
of putting it in this way, like to make everything long, we just put
I
it
can
in
decide
this
to change it.
exactly. So you can decide to change whatever is in here, and you still work to still work the same way. Now let's say I put
Thank
it directly like this now, and I use it like 2 million in 2 million places, right? If I want
you.
to
Yes.
change that particular URL, I have to change it in 2 million places. But with this now, I have to just change it here. And whenever I change it here, API.base will change wherever it is. So this is kind of like the best way to do it. So you don't have to repeat yourself like multiple times. It's very bad in coding to repeat yourself a lot of times. So
Thank
is
you
that
so
clear?
much. Yes,
Yeah.
it is. So
Okay.
back to that thing, please.
Okay,
That thing. Yes.
no problem, no problem. So you have a fetch, right? So whenever you call a fetch like this and you're trying to get data from a certain server, right, it returns to you a response. And that response is what we call a promise, right? So the response is not something that we can definitely just read like that. Like we can get it in our response format and we just put it to the front end and we see whatever we want. No, the response is a promise, and the promise we have to evaluate promises. So promises is kind of like just like the placeholders for the real data itself. They are not the real data. Do you get? So whenever you call a fetch, it will return a promise, and the promise is kind of like is the placeholder for the real data that is supposed to come, but has not yet
Okay.
arrived. Do you get? So that's that part.
Okay.
That's that part. Now, then you have this dot then, right? What the dot then will do is it will be able to like it is for us to be able to evaluate a promise, like for us to be able to like make sure that we get the data from that promise. You know, the promise is the placeholder, right? Is that one that is going to fetch the data. So what the dot then will do is for us to be able to like read that data that we're getting from the promise.
Yes.
So now the dot then is since we are chaining it to this fetch, the response that this is getting is going to come into that dot then. That's why we have this response here, which is a parameter, right? So if I wish, I can change it to res. As long as the parameter name just matches, we don't really it does not really matter what you name it. Do you get? But for
Okay.
simplicity's sake, so that we can all understand, let's name it response. So that we know that okay, it is the response that is coming from this fetch that is here. Do you get?
Yes.
Then we have this arrow function, right? And in the arrow function, we want to perform something on this response that we are getting. So that's
Okay.
essentially why this is here.
Okay.
So what we want to do is the response that we are getting, we want to turn it to a JSON file, right? So the JSON
Yes.
file is more readable for the browser, so it is like the better way of like returning the data. So and JavaScript comes with that pre-built function where you can just put a dot and JSON. It will turn whatever you have that file into a JSON file. Do you get? So that's what we are doing here.
Yes.
Now, for us to be able to read this JSON file, we now need another dot then to read it finally. You know, this dot then we use it to read the response and change it to a JSON file, right? So the last
Yes.
dot then now is what we are going to be using to read the main data itself. Okay, so that's why I named this one A, but actually let me name it data that I did before. So this is now going to be the original data that we're supposed to get from that API. Do you get? If you go to our HTML code now, let me open up current weather maps API. I want to open up current weather maps API. Okay. So this is their API, right? You can see now that, let's see, what did I put here? Lagos, right? Let me change this one to Lagos too. So if I change this to Lagos now and I reload this, so you see that everything changes. Okay, I did not go to London. Lagos. So it changed to Lagos now. We have this longitude and latitude and everything here. So this is the normal data that we are supposed to get, right? But this is not the format that the browser will give us. The browser will give us this nonsense format that we had before, that had all of those things that I said we do not need, right? So we have to change it to a JSON file so that we can understand what the browser was giving us, right? Now, after that, we now have to do this last dot then, which is where, let me just do this annoying. I hope I just annoying. Okay, so this last dot then now, what it does is it would we just call a parameter of data. The data is what we're now getting from this response to JSON, right? So that data is going to be passed down here, and we're just console.logging that value. So that's all that we are doing. We get the response from the fetch, right? The browser does not understand what that response is. Like JavaScript does not understand what that response is. So we pass it down using a dot then and we change it to a JSON that JavaScript can read, right? So after that, we want to be able to see that data. So that's why we have this last dot then here. Then that one we are just console.logging the data value that we are getting from this fetch request. You get. Now if you go to our console and check now, you see that we have it in the same format that we have this one. Let me just open this to the side. I just want to open this to the side actually, and this one to the side. Now, if you look at this closely, right, you see that the data matches each other, right? The first one is this code which contains the longitude and latitude. The way this one arranged it is actually different, but you see that it's the same data. Now for this one, the code came first, right? So this is the code here, longitude of 3.75. You see, it's still the same thing here, 3.75. Latitude of 6.58. Then you see the same thing here. So this last dot then is the one that allows us to see the data in the way that we actually need it, right? So that we'll be able to access those data. If we were to use this first one, we won't be able to see what that data was, and it will be really annoying that way. So the first response does JSON is just to convert it to a file that JavaScript can read. And after that, we just do this last dot then to actually get the data itself. So and please note, I can change it to anything. It's a parameter. I can name it anything. I can name it A, and I'll still name this one A, and it will still work the same way. Do you get it? Will still work the same way. You don't have to name it data. You can name it response safe. It will still work the same way and it will not clash. So let's do res and res, right? So when we come here, it will still return the same data that we're getting. Do you get it? So that's all there is to the fetch thing. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Right. So what's left to explain now? Let's see, is there anything left to explain that part? I don't think so. So I think this was a return initially. Give me a sec. I just want to see what this was initially. Okay. So we are returning the value. Now, the console.log part of all of these things is just for us to be able to see the data in our console. If in real life you want to use this, I always say it, if you have a data that you're getting from somewhere or you're evaluating from somewhere and you want to use it in real life, you won't use this console.log. You won't use it to get what you use is the return statement. So and that was what we used here before. So this part here, so return of response.json, right? So, and what that will do is to just return the value of the response.json. Now you can see now that instead of them passing this console.log of this one now, what they did is they just passed the display data, which is a function. And that function takes an argument of response. So whatever response this one is giving is going to be passed down into this new dot stem and to get passed down into the response. Hey, give me a second. Please give me a second, please. Okay, sorry guys. So we have to return this, what's it called now? This response.json, right? And we'll be displaying it in this data. So I'm going to give us like a snap quiz now. The quiz is going to be, you're going to write a fetch API, but with a different API. You're going to write a fetch API. And you're going to display, you're going to console.log the response that you're getting in a data. So this link is the one that you're going to be using. This with us. There's a joke. You don't have, let me just use the Jesus one. Okay, so let me copy this and use it in the chat. So I want everyone to actually try this here. So you're going to be using this URL and you're going to be also logging a response from it. So I give us 10 minutes to do that. 10 minutes, guys.
We are going to do what to the URL. Hello.
So did you guys hear me? 10 minutes for that question. So I'm going to be using that in the fetch method and you're trying to also log the response that you get. Hello, boss. I sent you a Google Meet link now. Sure, yeah. Yeah, good. Myself. So I'm sending the link, Google Meet link to him now. Yeah, 10 minutes, guys. I think it's almost up. I think I give it like 2. Still have like 6 minutes. Are you guys done, guys? Anyone here done? If you are done, kindly share your screen. At least are you done?
I am done.
Okay, let me make you post so you can share your screen. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay. I don't think it's like a combination of things per se. User management will probably just be like the create user, the admin section, the role section, all of those product management parts. I don't think it was named like user management roles like that. I don't think it was named like that.
Sorry, sir, are you talking to us?
Okay, Fatima, can you share your screen, please? Okay, can I see your screen now? Is it stuck on the Zoom screen or is it really? Okay, that's pretty nice. Can I see your code?
Oh, I've been talking since. I know I was on mute. So this is how I fetched it.
Okay. API, fetch, API, response, return response, and data possibility. Nice, nice, nice. So that's like the basic idea behind all of this fetch part. It's not really complicated, honestly. So was there anybody else that was able to do it? Tell me just review it, or you are having issues running it. If you have any issues, let me know. And why is at least not on the calling me? That's serious. So anybody else able to attempt it? Hello guys, can you hear me?
Sorry, we are still working on it.
Okay. Probably I should give you like 5 more minutes so you guys can round it. But I don't think I'm going to finish the weather app today. But let me give you 5 more minutes so you can round it. 5 minutes, and that would be what time like 12:17. So guys, you should be rounding up now, so it won't take much time. Have we been able to solve it? Hello guys. No one is talking. Oh, are you all lost hope in this class?
Yes, I've been able to get it.
Okay, let me make you go so you can share your screen. So I made you co-host. Okay. Okay, so this is really nice. Nice work. So you use the pair of base, then you return your data. Nice, nice. So we'll probably be moving on to how to get your data from something like this, because now you have separate data. So we're moving on. Anybody else? Anybody else before we move on? I guess not. So was there anybody else that was able to make an attempt? So let me just make kind of like a short correction, yes. So if you want to write it, you just do a fetch, right? So in my case, you can put in the URL yourself, or you can use the base method by keeping your URL like the other guys have done. So,
You're
so
not
let
sharing
me.
your screen now.
Oh, you can see my screen. Actually. You can see it. Okay, so I'm writing it here in this space. And we have to write on it. So you write your fetch, then you write the URL. So the URL in our case is this JSON. So then after
Sorry, I
this,
want to chip something in. I think what was actually confusing at first was that the example we used before required an API key. Even me, I was thinking it required a key, but it was when I tested it that I saw that it did not require a key. So maybe you should like tell us that it's not all APIs that you need a key for. That we have some
okay.
free APIs, yes.
Yes. I did not mention that, but I think I did. It's not all APIs. Some APIs are just public. They are really public. Like dummy data APIs. Now most of them are really public. You see this kind of API now. It has these users and the type people just come. This one is just generates like random users all the time. It's the same data. So it's not really a dynamic data API like that. You see, if I load this like 1 million times, if I load it 1 million times, I'm still going to have this Leangram up top, then breadth. It's always going to be like this because it's a static API. It's not like anything that is changing. It's just some random data that is there. But most of the APIs that will probably change, that will have data that will be changing with respect to current conditions, those ones will most likely require an API key, but not all APIs actually require one. Like this one now is a dummy data API, so nothing is really changing there. As you get. And for it to be so, even in your APIs, not all of them you have to like add something to this query part, like you'll be doing that queue like we had for this one. So that's why this one it did not have any documentation. See the one that we did before, this one of open weather map, it had the what's it called? It had a documentation of how you were to use this. But you see this one, this general dummy data ones, you just use them like that and they will work. Do you get? So hopefully that was not confusing for you guys. Okay, nobody is responding. I assume so. So after this, you write the .then method, right? So in the .then, we just want to like turn our response to a JSON format, which is going to be this into response.json like this, right? Then we'll add the last .then. So the last .then, which is going to be just the data that we need, right? So just do data. So just do data, then equals console the data, right? So when we check our console now, we should be able to see what we have. Where is this? Yes, so where is the local host? So if we check now, we see we have an array of 10 items which contains all of the data that was given by that dummy URL. So we have all of this data here. So this one contains the data because we console.log 2 times. So this one contains this data that we're getting from OpenWeatherMap. So that's why we have this object here that contains all of that data, right? So that's why this one is here. So by tomorrow, by God's grace, we'll be continuing on the query selector and like explain the rest of this code so that we can understand how to implement it in our code. Because I actually want us to rewrite this ourselves, if that is possible. If hopefully it's going to be our assignment actually. So I'll be dropping a couple of assignments for you guys to do as regards the fetch parameters so that you guys can actually learn more by actually browsing out the things. So I'll drop a couple of assignments and hopefully we all do them and we can submit them. So if there are any questions, I would appreciate if you could ask them now. So before the end of the class. Questions. If you've not understood everything that we've been doing so far, say it so I can explain to the best of my capabilities now. Questions, guys, questions. Are there any? And I don't know, hopefully you guys are taking notes somehow because it's very easy to look at this. When you have the recordings, so it shouldn't be much of an obstacle, but notes are very important. You just think you know these things off the top of your head, and until you try them, it starts becoming magic. But hopefully all is clear. All that we've done so far has been clear. Like so far in this class today has been clear. If it has not, please kindly ask your questions so I can sorry, what? I guess no one has a question. Was this second part recorded? Because Michael has left the meeting. Hopefully it was. Okay, it's still being recorded. Nice. All right, guys. So we've come to the end of today's classes. There are no questions. I will be dropping the assignments very, very soon. So was there anybody trying to ask a question? Mike, just question. All right, guys. We'll see you later. Bye, guys.
All right, thank you.